Welcome to the Throttle Leadership Podcast. Our theme for 2026 continues. The future of work, meaning is the new money. Because meaning is simply the greatest motivational force on earth. But 68% of the global workforce is disengaged, leaving $9.6 trillion in productivity on the table every year. Gen Z, the canary in the coal mine, is exposing structural failures everyone else learned to ignore, rationalize, or endure. I'm Dr. John Dentico, your host, bringing over 30 years of experience in leadership, strategic thinking, and designing solutions that solve real problems. This podcast delivers boots-on-the-ground intelligence, real conversations with CEOs, fractional executives, coaches, and small and medium-sized business leaders navigating the same crisis, mitigating the talent hemorrhage before competitive viability disappears. We go beyond symptoms like engagement scores and wellness programs to focus on the structural failures beneath them. Frontline intelligence, actionable frameworks, hard truths. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Now let's throttle up and dive into today's episode. Hello again, and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. This is your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me today is Cortney Watson. Cortney Watson is a fractional advisor and business coach who spent more than 20 years leading teams in Washington, D.C., including serving as chief operating officer of a consulting firm that reached $40 million in revenue. She doubled teams and profitability, expanded consultant networks from 50 to over 450, and steered more than 1,000 client projects. But more importantly, she experienced the late nights, constant decisions, and pressure of scaling without losing what made the business successful. That experience shaped her mission, helping leaders grow profitable, resilient businesses while building teams and cultures that can thrive beyond them. Her slogan captures it: scale smarter, lead stronger. Cortney specializes in turning growth chaos into clarity by strengthening leadership, improving decision-making, and building systems that support sustainable performance without requiring the founder to be the linchpin of every operation. If you've ever felt like too much depends on you, or if you're watching talented people burn out during intense growth, this conversation is for you, and I am truly pleased and delighted to have Cortney here this morning with me. Good morning, Cortney. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing great. It's cold here in D.C.
Cold on the East Coast of the U.S., without a doubt.
Yeah.
So, Cortney, let me ask you my first favorite question, and that is, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? And what were some of the influences in your early life?
Sure. So I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in a very small town. I think it was about 10,000 people, about an hour north of Grand Rapids. And my father was a small business owner. He actually was a prosecutor for a while in Detroit and did not like it. And so when he was 33 years old, he gave it all up and started his own business as a Wendy's franchisee. So we moved to the west side of the state when I was 3. And I always admired him for making such a big career change that ended up being a successful one. I liked that he took a risk on himself, but I also decided I was never going to be a small business owner. I saw how stressful it was. And of course, now I'm a small business owner myself. So, and then I had really supportive parents who really believed in me, which I think is very important. And my mother was this kind of stay-at-home mom, very extroverted, knew everyone in town. She grew up in the 50s having undiagnosed dyslexia. She was pretty amazing. She ended up getting her master's, but she had to work so hard. So I think growing up, she really instilled in me the importance of working hard, of being disciplined, things like that. So I grew up with 2 really supportive parents who showed me the importance of entrepreneurship and what it meant to be a good leader, but also a mother who really drove in me discipline and hard work, and you can kind of achieve what you want to. So
Great. Yeah, great. Really, really great. Yeah, I mean, the parents play an amazing role in getting you started and putting you on the path. No question about it.
Yep.
Let me ask you this question. You've scaled a consulting firm to $40 million and expanded the network from 50 to 450 consultants. At what point in that growth trajectory did you realize the founder bottleneck was the actual constraint on growth? And what was the moment that made it undeniable?
I think they were actually pretty good at understanding that to grow the business, they would have to step back. And that's what I do a lot now with my clients I have. But it was pretty remarkable when they did step back and start delegating kind of everything, which, took money. They had to invest in people. They had to take risks on people. That's when the business really started to explode because they had hired other people to bring in business, do the business development. Before, it was just based on a few people that were in charge of bringing in business. But when they were willing to empower other people to do it and teach them how to do it, then that exploded. And then they started to really professionalize the company with my leadership and expand the operations team, which again is like no one likes to spend money on overhead. But then all of a sudden they had time and I had time to really be strategic and focus on business development and what was going to grow the company.
Yeah, I can understand that, especially sort of having the death grip. When you're a founder, you kind of have a death grip on everything, trying to control all this stuff. And letting go is hard.
Yes.
It's very hard to do.
Yeah.
No question. Let me ask you this question because I'm very curious about this. I'm obviously, as a small business myself, I'm such a big believer in small and medium-sized businesses, certainly as the backbone of the American economy. 78% or more are the backbone of the American economy. So let me ask you this question. You mentioned that larger businesses need to be run differently than small ones.
Absolutely.
What's the inflection point where the skills and instincts that got a founder to success start working against them? What has to change in how leaders think and operate?
Looking back, I think in terms of once we got to 30 or 40 employees, it started to get more complicated. I'm sure it's different for every business depending on what the business does. But when I look back, that seems to be when things start to come off the rails a little bit and you can't just do it by instinct. And the communication becomes a lot more important too. When it was small, everyone knew everything and you didn't have to have this change management plan, this communication plan with the company. As we got larger, it got really hard to row in the same direction. You have to communicate effectively. You have to get people on the same page. And you have to be a lot more strategic about the way you do it. That's when we really started focusing on developing a strategic plan, which is funny. You always think, oh, every company has strategic plans. But most of them don't. Actually, a lot of the clients I work with before I start working with them don't have strategic plans. And I always tell new clients that's completely normal. There's always this feeling, oh, I don't have a strategic plan. I know I should. But I would say that's kind of one of the first steps, I think, when you are hitting that inflection point, if you don't already have it, is budgeting and strategic plans. And what I said is a lot of companies don't have that. And that's where you can get people rowing in the same direction and be really strategic with people's time. Because what I found is people start tripping all over each other if you don't have a plan with clear roles and responsibilities.
Yeah. Have you run into, in your work with the different companies, have you run into or been part of an organization that is functioning with EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System?
I have. I don't, admittedly, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I have heard a lot of companies can't use that. My impression, and you tell me, you might know more than I do, is that they kind of come in, they help you set up a system, a plan, and then you're in charge of implementing it. So that's one way to do it. And then sometimes there's consultants who will come in and kind of make sure the plan gets executed effectively. So I think with the EOS, you have to have a real disciplined leadership that follows through.
Yeah, I would agree.
I-
I'm really starting, to be honest, I'm starting to research EOS myself and looking at it. And I'm about a third of the way through the book Traction, which is the book that really started the rage, as it were.
Gotcha.
My initial response to it is it's a management structure.
Yeah.
It's basically a managerial structure that you put in place. Seats are the leaders, the people in charge. It's got some really good concepts, some good ideas. For me, at least at this point, there's a lot missing from the leadership perspective in what I refer to as the 21st century leadership model. When we talk about leadership, traditionally, we've talked about leadership as position, the people in charge, right? They are the leadership. And I have a different view, and that is that leadership is a process, that leadership is an influence relationship. These days, much more so, because with the democratization of knowledge and information, certainly now even more so with AI, anybody can exert influence. And the question, of course, is, are we allowing the people in the organization to have a greater say in the decision-making processes? We talked about this a little bit before we started the podcast. What is their personal agency? And I haven't worked out how that concept, how that philosophy blends with EOS yet. I think EOS is a good system, but it's not the be-all and end-all system for any small business. I'd love to get any reflection from you on that.
I think there's a lot of good systems out there. There's a lot of people who can do strategic plans internally and externally. There's a lot of people, like you said, who are in positions of leadership, but can they actually execute it? Can they have the discipline strategy? Can they focus their time in a productive way? I think that's where the really hard part is. You need somebody kind of driving the change and the plan and effectively doing it. You can't just push it on people. You have to do it in an effective manner. And I think that's where some of these systems miss the mark, or didn't have that part of it.
Right. And I make a differentiation between strategic planning and strategic thinking.
Yes.
Okay. Simply put, is that strategic planning, you're looking to find answers to questions, which has been laid out there by the management or the senior leaders. Whereas in strategic thinking, you're making sure you're asking yourself the right questions. You're not trying to solve the problems. You're making sure you're solving the right problems.
Right.
Because all you're doing, if you don't, is throwing good money after bad. And you could take the organization down the road that it wasn't ever intended to go down and spend gobs of money on it and not really get what you need in order to make the organization effective and efficient. So just kind of a little bit of a twist there. Let's talk. This is so interesting to me. I've talked about this in the last couple of years in speeches and in podcasts, and that's burnout. Okay, let's talk about burnout a little bit. You focus on avoiding burnout during intense growth periods, both for owners and employees. But there's a tension here. Growth often requires intensity. How do you distinguish between productive intensity that builds capability and destructive intensity that burns people out? That's a little bit of a complex question there.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I think in general, a growing organization can be very positive for the culture. Like, especially younger generations, they want to feel like they're part of a company that's growing, that's doing innovative things, that's exciting. The other thing about growth is you can move up the ladder, as they say, a lot easier if you're a good employee. And if you're growing, you need more managers, you need more people in different positions. So generally, I've found that growing companies are a very positive thing. I think where problems can occur is there's a ton of pressure put on the employees to grow at no matter the cost. And sometimes the environment or the economy is just not right for that. I think especially right now in DC, there's some companies that are really struggling. And then the other thing is asking employees to just constantly bend over backwards when there is growth, right? And I think it's okay. I think most employees, because they see the opportunity and they want to be helpful for the company, they're willing to do it to some extent. Or there might be a period, or there might be a week, or there might be that occasional weekend you have to do work. But I think when it's constant, that can be really problematic for the employee. And I think you have to be careful. I mean, I work a lot in the government relations and consulting industry, and I'll tell partners and owners, like, be careful with how much work you take on. It's hard to turn it down, but if you're going to burn your employee out, your employee is way more valuable than one client that might be gone in 2 or 3 years. Like, they could help grow the business. Like, the retention is important. The cost of replacing that employee is really high. And so it's really important to find that balance between growth and making sure your employees are supported and not burned out. One thing I have done with companies and with my last company that was very effective, and again, I don't think a lot of companies do this, is the forecasting. And you can get pretty good at forecasting revenue. And that way you can start to see, okay, I think this client's coming on. I know this client's staying. And then you can start to say, we need to hire another employee. I know that it takes 3 to 6 months to get an employee fully functional and ready to do this. And so I need to hire them now to get to that point. And so that can be a good way of continuing to grow, but also making sure you have enough staff, that you're not burning out the ones you do have, because when you are, they leave and then it's a whole different issue.
Yeah, I think for me, from a leadership perspective, when I look at the big picture, and I've thought a lot about this in the last couple of years, I think, well, let me begin with just a statement. To me, the single greatest motivation force on the planet is meaning.
Yes.
People are searching for a sense of meaning. They want to matter. They want their work to matter. They want to be masters of their own fate. So I think strategic alignment, that is the company and the employee, values-based, values alignment, to me, from a leadership perspective, is one of the single most important things you can do as a company, so that people know what they're contributing to, that they're part of something, quote unquote, special, something bigger than themselves, that there is this energy created because they find purpose in the things that they're doing. And I think too often companies hire people and they don't go through enough of that. They hire them for skills. Get the skills in here. And the answer is, well, you can learn a skill, but your values are your values. And if your values don't align with the organization, especially when you're looking at Gen Z, they may be out of here pretty soon. They may say, listen, I can't do this. They may not have something in hand to go to. But they're a generation that says, hey, listen, I just can't work here because we're just not in sync. And it may very well be, and as my research has shown, it's prevalent in all the generations, the 5 generations we have working in the workforce. It's just a lot of us put up with it, where they're not putting up with it. So to me, that's so vitally important, strategic alignment, that a company can say, let me tell you what we do and why we do it, and what the benefit is to society or the benefit is to our client. So people go, yeah, I like that. I want to be part of this. I always use the example of SpaceX. And when they do the heavy lift, for example, or they do a rocket, when they did the first heavy lift, the camera pans around to all the employees, 1,000, maybe 2,000 employees, cheering at the top of their lungs that here comes this, we've made it and it's successful. I mean, those people know why they're working hard. They have a real sense of what purpose looks like for them. They're part of something special. And it's my fondest hope that more companies can follow that kind of idea, at least that concept, and create that in their organizational frameworks. I'd love to get any reflection you have on that.
Yeah. So I think one is people can pick up on it if it's just tacked on at the end. Like, oh, by the way, this is our purpose and mission and why we do what we do, right? Like, it has to start from the leadership and really be embedded in the culture. I have found a lot to kind of help embed it into the culture, but also to really convey what the mission of the organization is to start even in the job description, to start in the interview process. The company I work for really did have to do a change around that. And it was really wonderful because I think, like you said, everyone just kind of put up with it. But then when we dug down to it, we're like, there's so many wonderful things we're doing and so many positive impacts. Like, why aren't we talking about that more? Why aren't we embedding that more in the culture? And so that was really important to make that change and live and breathe it. I've seen companies be very successful with pro bono work or giving back to like a local charity and doing stuff around that. And I think that makes people feel like they're part of something bigger. But the other thing I think that, and you and I talked about this before we started, that's really important is to make people feel like they're part of the change of the company, that they matter, that they have a stake in the decision making. And I think there's lots of different ways you can do that. It gets harder, right? The bigger the company becomes. But I think letting people voice their opinions, listening to what people say, staff surveys, facilitated workshops, all those kinds of things can really make people feel like part of the company and that they're part of the change the company is making. And by the way, you want your employees' opinions on things because a lot of times they know a lot more about what's working and what's not than the leaders do, because the bigger the company gets, the longer you're there, the less in touch you are with some of the day-to-day things. So I think there's multifaceted ways to make an employee realize that the company matters and that what they're doing matters, but also that they matter to the leaders, their opinions, and the work that they do for the company.
Absolutely right on. Absolutely great. Yeah, I think it lessens burnout. It may not eliminate it totally, but it lessens burnout because people purposes and meaning is it's incredible. I can remember times when I've been burned out. I mean, just fried. And you just feel like you're wandering, like why am I doing this? No energy. Everything seems sapped. And then there are times when I was working 18 hours a day and you couldn't burn me out. You could try, but you couldn't do it because I knew I mattered. The work I was doing mattered. Yep. It was very focused. You get up 4 or 5 hours later and hit it again. And you just knew in your soul, you knew in your heart that, hey, I'm making a difference here. I matter. And people know that. People understand that. And so I think it's a remedy that I think too often gets overlooked. And it's sad. But that's why I believe in a very succinct, very targeted mission statement for an organization. Say it in one sentence. Everybody should be able to say it. Everybody should have it memorized. This is who we are. This is what we do. That's it. And live by it. So one of the problems is what you promote is not what organizations reward in the end.
Right.
In other words, you say this, you've got a great mission statement, you got this, you got that. But then when it comes down to it, you reward the things that are actually defeating your own sense of purpose. It's just amazing to me. Sometimes it's like, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing I think really matters, and I've seen research on this, and I'm sure you have too, is the manager. Like, if you don't like your manager, if they're not a good manager, I mean, you're just not going to keep employees. It matters an incredible amount. And the reason I've stayed at some of the organizations as long as it did, because I had fantastic leaders and managers. They weren't perfect. None of us are. But I knew that they cared about me and they really wanted me to be successful and advance me in the organization. And oftentimes companies, that's an afterthought. Oh, you're really good at this. I'm going to promote you. And now you're going to start managing people. And you've never managed people before. And the skills that got you to the management role aren't always the skills that make you a good manager. People can learn to be good managers, but sometimes they need to be taught. And I think that is, if you're having retention issues, there's lots of reasons you might be, but that might be the number one reason that the manager or leader is not doing a good job. Just to be honest, I think you can't, underestimate the importance of having good managers in place.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, that is a perennial issue for as long as I've been in the work world.
Oh, yeah.
You may be a technologist, for example, really good at technology, really good at what you do, and we promote them and make them a manager, and then we don't give them any training.
Right.
Right? You just, okay, here it is. You did great on that. Go do great on that. No, different skill set here, bud. Different way we come at the problem, especially if you believe in the energy of collaboration. If you believe in, hey, let's get everybody together, let's figure out the problem, and let's work together and collaborate. I'm told, I don't know how many guests, they're probably tired of listening to this. But, when I started developing my own model of leadership 30 years ago, I based it on one premise, on one foundation, and that was contribution. Open the door. We got a problem. We got an issue. Anybody got any ideas? Anybody want to jump in here? Let's see what we can put on the table and see how we can advance what we need to do to make the organization and ourselves successful. So it's very interesting to me. I'm with you 100%. Let me ask this question because I've interviewed other fractional people, and I want to just focus on fractional just for a second.
Sure.
You talked about in the company that you were managing, you grew it from 50 to 450 fractional people, as I understand it.
Yeah.
What is it about fractional work? Why are people, and I've talked to people from around the world now on their fractional work, and it's booming. Fractional work is booming. I mean, that's a segment that's growing. Yes. Why do you think that is? What are people looking for when they're leaving the typical corporate world, if you will, and entering the fractional world? What is it that they're looking for?
Are you asking about the fractional people themselves or why people hire fractional people?
Why don't we take it this way? How about what the fractional CTOs or CFOs, what are they looking for? Why do they want to make the jump into the fractional world?
Well, honestly, for me, and why I made the jump was I wanted the flexibility. The role I have, 2 young kids that I wanted to be around for more. I wanted a little bit less stress in my life. It's when you're kind of popping in and out of companies and telling them what to do, not having to necessarily always implement everything and deal with every internal politics of everything. There's an appeal to that. I like the diversity of the work, that I get to work with lots of different types of companies. And I also feel like I have so much to offer now because I learned so much about growing a company, and unfortunately, sometimes the hard way. And it's fun to work with a company and say, oh no, I made that mistake before. I know you want to do this, but don't do that because this is what happens. And so it's fun to be able to impart my knowledge and help people avoid some of those mistakes. And so I find it very rewarding. The hard part is the hustle, right? Like it's a different kind of hustle, and you know this in a different way too. It's like you have to constantly be feeding the sales funnel and making sure you have enough work. But I like the flexibility, and honestly, just being my own boss now, I feel like I've worked for other people for so long, and they, like I said, they were generally great managers and leaders, but I'm ready to be my own boss now.
Great. So let's look at the other side. We know that cost is an issue. Cost is an issue. Rather than hiring a full-time chief financial officer, you hire a fractional. What are some of the other reasons people want to bring
specific expertise? Like me, for example, right? Like a company might have a COO, but they don't have a COO who has experience with scaling a company really quickly, or they have experience with a 40-person company, but not with a 150-person company. And you can get those kind of little insights and, a few hours a week or whatever the arrangement looks like. And you can kind of get that advisory support. The other thing that I've seen happen a lot is people are able to kind of test people. So I just actually read an article recently, and I think it I think it made sense to me was a lot of people are hiring for the C-suite fractional people who have worked for them because it's a way to test them out. Wow, they're really good. They really know what they're talking about. I've worked with them for 6 months or a year. We've grown and now we're ready to hire a full-time COO. And so a fractional support is a good way to test people out. Now, will those people make the jump? Not always, but sometimes the offer is too good to refuse for the fractional person and they end up wanting to go back to an in-house position.
Very interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but sure, it's a doorway to a full-time hire.
Yeah, and so the company I worked for, we worked with, our consultants were mostly grant writing consultants. And that was a good way. Like sometimes we had a lot of grants that we were writing at one time. So that was, we could scale up quickly, right? And sometimes we didn't. And so we didn't need them. Or you had a really niche expertise that we needed in NIH on cancer research or something like that. So we can go out and find that specific person. We don't need to hire them full time and they don't want to be hired full time. But it was a way to use expertise when we needed it, depending on which client we were working with.
It reminds me, it makes me harken back to the time I worked for government services companies myself many years ago.
Yep.
And I got involved in managing proposals and writing government proposals. And let me tell you, that can be a high burnout job.
Yes.
Because it's so intense, especially the last 10 days before you got to put everything together, as you well know, right?
Oh, yeah.
Proposal and the technical proposal. And then especially I wound up doing something back then that was considered innovative, but it somewhat innovative. And that was bringing 5 or 6 subcontracts together, subcontractors, and then figuring out how each one can write different segments of the technical proposal and how you made it sound like one person wrote the whole thing. And this is way before AI ever was even a dream, I think.
Yeah, so and AI is now transforming a lot of the grant writing, but
it requires a lot of consistency, forethought, and just hanging with it. You know, there's sometimes you just one step at a time, one paragraph at a time to get it all done.
And I'll tell you, there's so many people out there who love writing grants. I personally do not like writing grants. I like to oversee them and manage them and build a business on them. But I'm always amazed. There's so many people who love it. So it is very rewarding. You win the grant. You know, that entity can have millions and do all kinds of wonderful things for their community. And I think that seeing that, the work in action can be really great for the writers.
So we're getting close to the end here. So I'd like to ask you a question, and that is, what is your hope for the future? Where do you see Cortney going in the future, the next year or two? What's on your horizon?
Yeah, I made the leap to start my own business. So I have some business goals, but one of my goals is to be less goal-oriented. I've been so driven and so focused my whole life. And I'm a little tired, to be honest. And I have these 2 great kids. And so part of the reason I made the jump was just to find a little bit more balance and enjoy my life more. I've been really making a concerted effort to do more things that I have fun. I do pickleball. I'm doing a lot more happy hours. I'm reading a lot more. I'm watching TV more. It's like I'm in this weird stage where I'm not, my career is not as high pressure as it used to be. And maybe someday I'll go back. And my kids are a little bit older now, so they're not as demanding physically. And so I have more time than I've had in years. And it's a weird feeling, to be honest, to all of a sudden not have the weight of the world on me in both home and professionally. And I'm just focused on having more fun and living more in the moment and less focused on what my next goal is and what's my next accomplishment. And that's a complete change for me. So I'm learning to sit with it.
I understand completely. And it's great. Yeah, I think it's important to have Really important to have a purpose. It's really important.
Yeah.
I always tell people this thing here is the greatest longevity organ in the body. I become a big fan of neuroplasticity, this idea that you can grow new sections of your brain if you challenge it to do things. But you can challenge it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to stay relevant, to keep in it, but to enjoy yourself as much as you can. So I'm on the bus with you. I appreciate it very much. Listen, this has been a wonderful conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time today here on the Throttle Leadership Podcast. I wish you and your family the greatest success in the future. Thanks so very much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, John.
You're most welcome. This is Dr. John Dentico. Remember, meaning is the new money, but it requires building the structures that deliver it. If today's conversation challenged your thinking or gave you a framework worth implementing, share it with a leader who needs to hear it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit throttleupleadership.com for more resources. Until next time, keep throttling up and keep the people at the center of everything you do.